Hey everybody, this episode of Think Like a Leader comes to you from Tagaytay in the Philippines, about 60 kilometers south of Metro Manila. I am here for a retreat with our Victory Metro Manila elders, our executive team, and the Victory Bishop Council. This morning, as I got up early again because of jet lag, reading through the book of Leviticus, that's just where I am in my morning Bible reading. There was a phrase that struck me as something important for leaders, as we think like leaders, as we raise up leaders, as we lead. And over in the first 10 chapters of Leviticus, we have the phrase, the Lord spoke to Moses. The Lord spoke to Moses. Then often it would say the Lord spoke to Moses and instructed Moses then to speak to Aaron, and then would be the distribution of the word of the Lord to the people. Sometimes it would say the Lord spoke to Moses to tell the people. Sometimes it would say the Lord spoke to Moses to tell Aaron. But it was always God speaking to Moses. But then it changes. In chapter 10, of course, we find Aaron's sons bringing strange fire, unauthorized worship to the Lord, and they die. Immediately after the fire of the Lord falls on them, chapter 11 says, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. The Lord spoke to Moses, chapters 1 through 10, the Lord spoke to Moses, the Lord spoke to Moses, the Lord spoke to Moses to tell Aaron, the Lord spoke to Moses to tell the people, and then we have the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. Now, we know that Aaron was the older brother of Moses, and as God often does, he violated the cultural norms. Of course, in the culture in those days, the eldest son was always the leader. But so often God would go against the cultural grain, against the flow, and do the opposite for his purposes. For instance, he didn't choose any of his older brothers, he chose the youngest. Same with Joseph. God bypassed brother after brother after brother for Joseph. So we see this pattern over and over, and we see it with Moses and Aaron. God chooses not the eldest, like would have been the cultural norm. But here he is. Aaron is second in charge. Moses is the leader. God speaks to Moses. Moses tells Aaron, and then the word of the Lord rolls out. But we see a change in chapter 11. God spoke to Moses and Aaron in 11:1. And then over the next few chapters, it bounces back and forth. About half the time, the Lord speaks to Moses, who speaks to Aaron, and about half the time it says the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. What does this have to do with thinking like a leader? You know, when we start out in leadership, especially spiritual leadership, we're visionaries. We're hearing from God. Maybe it's a church plant. Maybe it's pioneering a new area. And we have a word from the Lord, and we have to communicate that to people. But certainly the goal is not that we just hear God on behalf of others, but the goal in leadership is that we multiply, that we build a team, and that we hear God together. And that's what happens. Moses was hearing from the Lord and communicating that. But then we get to this point in chapter 11 where Moses and Aaron are hearing from the Lord together. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, hearing God together. And our hope is not just one, but the hope is that we'll hear God together with a team. Hopefully every leader, spiritual leader, is hearing God, being led by the Spirit, hearing what is on God's heart. And then we bring others into that team who are following our leadership, but yet we want to hear God together. And hopefully it goes not just from Moses and then Moses and Aaron hearing God together, but a broader team. And that's what we're doing this week. It is really a privilege and an honor to be here with our Bishop's Council. And we've been praying and seeking God and hearing God together for a number of years. And then we also have the Metro Manila elders, a great team that are veteran leaders who are hearing God together, and our executive team hearing God together. And so I want to encourage you as a leader. Yes, you need to hear the voice of God. You need to discern the will of God. But we also need to build a team and hear God together. It's a dangerous thing to be that pastor or that prophet or that spiritual leader who is the lone person hearing God and discerning God's will and then becoming the voice of that for everyone else. That's really a terrifying place. Versus hearing God together, seeking God together. So I pray that in your world, you'll not only hear God, but the same way the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, God will speak to you and others and others and others, you and your team. May God help us build teams. to hear his voice and discern his will and to lead together. Hey, this is Think Like a Leader on Moses and Aaron hearing God together, part 2. I just walked in our meeting. We're about to start. I mentioned to Bishop Gilbert. Gilbert, what do you think about that?
I think it's great. I thought when Steve was telling me that at first, if you're a church planter, if you're starting something, you hear from God, and that's what you do. You hear from God, you tell the people what God says, but it should not stop there. The goal is to be able to get an Aaron to hear from God with you, eventually Aaron's sons, the priests, and you have this whole company of leaders hearing God together, not just you. So for a season, it's great, it's you, and everybody could do that, but it should not stop with you. There should be leaders hearing God with you.
Great, Gilbert. And listen, if you're a leader and you're not able to hear what God's saying through others, that's terrifying. I know there are leaders who think they are sort of the ears of God for a whole church or a whole movement or a whole community, but boy, I hope that's not any of us. We need to learn to hear God together, and if the team is hearing something from God different than what the leader's hearing, then that's actually good. We need to learn that none of us hear God perfectly. I have 2 ears, but I'm in a room with people today. There are probably about 40 ears in there, people who really know how to hear God. So we're just trusting today and the rest of our time together, we will hear God together.